Hi everyone, welcome to Draw with Jan channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to draw realistic water droplets using graphite pencils. I'm drawing an outline for 3 water droplets. I used a 3H pencil for drawing the outline. I'm now using a 4B pencil for the darker shadow effect. I'm also using HB along with 4B to blend it as I'm shading. You need to make sure that you're not drawing harsh outlines, but blending it well as you're shading. I'm now using 3H for shading the inner part of the water droplet. The shading needs to be very light, and hence I'm using a 3H pencil. You can also use 2H, 4H, or any other lighter shade depending on your convenience. As I'm shading, if you notice, I'm leaving a certain part blank for the highlight. You can also create highlights later on using an eraser, but I prefer to usually leave it blank while shading because it produces a more realistic output. Now using a HB pencil for the shadow and also for some part of the shading inside the water droplet to make it look darker. This is to add more depth to the drawing. You just need to make sure not to produce any harsh lines while you're shading. Now using a 2B pencil for the shadow. Shadow is extremely important to make your object look realistic. Now switching to the next water droplet, first drawing an outline using 3H, and then using a darker shade, HB in this case, to add the shadow. This is just the initial shading and we will be using darker shades for the shadow effect later on. For the inner part of the water droplet, I'm going to use 3H because the shading needs to be very light. As mentioned before, feel free to use any light shade graphite pencil for this. Just like the previous water droplet, as I'm shading, I'm going to leave certain parts blank for the highlights. As you notice, the texture of this paper is not smooth. It is actually a watercolor drawing paper. Alternatively, you can use a smooth drawing surface to make your shading much easier. A realistic water droplet has to look transparent, so I just wanted to try it out on this paper to see how it looked. Take your time to make your shading as smooth as possible. I'm actually shading much slower than this. This video is recorded at twice the pace of my original drawing, adding more depth to the outline to make it more realistic. I'm now going to just blend it using an earbud. Now switching to a darker shade for the outline and the shadow. You can use any pencil from a 6B to a 9B for this. The darker shade is for the outline and the shadow, so make sure not to shade the inner part of the water droplet using this. Make sure not to create any harsh lines. Keep blending as you're shading. You can use lighter shades for blending. As you're moving away from the object, the shadow needs to get lighter and lighter, and you can use 4B, 2B or HB for this. Finally, to blend it all in, I'm going to use a 3H pencil to go over the entire shading of the shadow. Now defining the outline of the water droplet more clearly. I'm using a 3H pencil for this because the shading needs to be light here. For the top part of the water droplet, I'm using a HB pencil because I want the shading to be slightly darker here. As I'm shading, I'm making sure that there are no harsh outlines and I'm blending it all in. Now moving on to the third water droplet. Use a HB or 2B pencil to first draw the outline. Now using a HB pencil to shade the inner part of the water droplet. As I'm shading, I'm going to leave certain parts blank for the highlights. Now for the outline, use a dark shade like 6B or even darker. Now follow the same technique for shading the shadow. Use lighter shades as you're moving away from the object. Finally, blend it all in nicely to produce a smooth effect. Now for this water droplet, I'm also going to use a darker shade for the inner side of the water droplet. The places where you create the highlights, shadows, and the dark tones really define the position and angle of the object and also help in producing a realistic output. Finally, take some time to add finishing touches to your drawing. Blend it well wherever you notice harsh lines. Define the outlines more clearly. Focus on the shadows and the highlights. For the finishing touches, I'm using a white gel pen to define the highlights. I'm now using a black pen to add more depth to the shadows. These small finishing touches go a long way in making your drawing look more realistic. Hope you enjoyed watching this video. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more drawing videos. Thank you and see you again soon.